will be removed from office with immediate effect. Now, if the Prime Minister wins with less than 50% voting against him, he stays in the job and has the right to remain there unchallenged for 1 year. So how are the numbers looking so far? Well, this morning, Sky News understands that around 12 of 20 MPs who were elected in 2019 and are part of the so-called pork pie plot have already submitted letters. We know 7 other MPs have already publicly called for Boris Johnson to go, although many more letters could officially have gone in. Well, let's talk to a panel of MPs to test the mood as the Prime Minister prepares to take questions in Parliament. We're joined now by Sarah Jones, the Shadow Minister for Policing, who is the Labour MP for Croydon Central, Pauline Latham, the Conservative MP for Mid Derbyshire, and Alan Smythe, the SNP's Foreign Affairs spokesman, who's the MP for Stirling. Sarah Jones, to you first of all. We did see what appeared to be genuine contrition on the face of the Prime Minister yesterday. Do you believe him that he is full of remorse for what happened?
I think the Prime Minister has completely lost authority and he's putting to shame the office of Prime Minister. He cannot claim, surely nobody would believe that he can claim that he didn't know what he was walking into and then didn't recognise it when he saw it. I think this government is tired, is mired in this party sleaze, and they are not operating with the best interests of the people at heart. They are not dealing with this awful rise in inflation and cost of living crisis where Labour has policies. We have plans to reduce energy bills, to get the economy moving, to learn to live well with COVID. All of these issues, the government are not pushing forward any kind of agenda. They are just trapped in this defending of a man who seems unable to tell the truth.
And that is the point, isn't it, Pauline Latham, that whatever you think of Boris Johnson from inside the Conservative Party, whether you think he should stay or go, these discussions are nothing but a distraction.
They are a distraction. There's some really important things out there that actually everybody needs to be focusing on, what Russia's doing, on inflation. They're really serious issues, and all this is just a distraction from the real issues that we do need to tackle, because we don't know what's going to happen with Russia. We need to be focused on that and the Ukraine. There's just so many things that we need to be thinking about. And this really, although I'm completely understand how the people feel out there, they are very angry and frustrated when they follow the rules. And it looks as though those in Downing Street did not follow the rules. But actually, in many ways, it's out of date and it's happened. Yes, it's happened. And should anybody be seen to have lied to the Commons, then clearly they have to go. But really, what we need to be focusing on is bigger things, much bigger than anything else that's happening.
Have you sent a letter to Sir Graham Brady suggesting a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister?
No, because we don't know what Sue Gray's report will say. So I want to see that before I pass any judgment. And it is for individual MPs to make that decision. And I wouldn't tell you if I sent it in anyway. But I mean, as we haven't come to the conclusion of the process, it's only another few days and we will know. So I think I'm just suspending my judgment at the moment because I want to really focus on other things that are happening in the country and the world.
Thanks very much. Let's bring in Alan Smith for the SNP in Stirling. You've got an Opposition Day motion next week, the SNP have. Will you use that to force a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister if enough letters don't go in between now and then?
Well, our position's clear. We think Boris Johnson should go, and frankly, I think there's hermit monks in caves in Tibet who know it's when, not if he goes. That's obvious. And it's not just about the recent revelations, it's about the culture of his government, the way he's undermined truth and integrity in public life, the way he's been caught out, being fast and loose with the truth over the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's going to be a border in the Irish Sea, then there wasn't, then there was, and all of that stuff. So our Opposition Day, it's presently we're looking to be talking about the cost of of living, because that's a crisis facing millions of people up and down the country. But events may well change, and we'll keep our powder dry on that. But we're clear that we think it is when, not if, he should go. Same as a referendum on Scottish independence, is when, not if. But the sooner he goes, the sooner the UK and Scottish politics will be the better for it. And I have to say, fair play to the Scottish Conservatives in the Holyrood Parliament, that they've unanimously called for him to resign, and I think he should really follow their lead.
Yes, it hasn't done a great deal for relations between the Conservatives in Westminster and in Scotland, has it, the last week or so? Let's go back to Sarah Jones for Labour in Croydon Central. What do you think Keir Starmer is going to push the Prime Minister on today? Will it be on the parties, or will it instead be the cost of living? We've seen inflation rising to figures that we haven't seen since 1992 today.
Well, I don't know what he's going to ask, but we are in crisis, and clearly the Prime Minister isn't operating with the interests of the people at heart, whether you're talking about foreign affairs, whether you're talking about the cost of living, whether you're talking about COVID and how we learn to live well with that. There are a whole raft of really serious problems that this government has completely failed to address. In many cases, they've exacerbated by 10 years of poor governing. And I suspect, the country now is waiting to hear from the Prime Minister the truth about what he actually did and said and knew and saw on those multiple occasions that parties seem to have occurred. And they want to know what is going to be done about the problems that they are facing. People are facing huge energy increases in bills. Their real-term wages are going down. We have new tax rises coming in April with national insurance. It's not too late for the government to fix some of those problems, but at the moment it's only Labour that has a plan. Conservatives are just talking to themselves.
Pauline Latham, do you think Boris Johnson will be Prime Minister at the next election?
Well, that's a long time away, and as we say, a week's a long time in politics, so I don't know. He may decide he's had enough and he'll go, but I don't know. I'm not privy to his thoughts. But I have to say, what the opposition are doing are not really doing their job. They're not scrutinising government in the same way. What they're doing is just fixating on one issue. And I do think that we need to be looking at other issues.
I think both Sarah Jones and Alan Smith would have something to say about this. Alan did just point out, didn't he, that they're not going to be using necessarily their opposition day motion to force a vote of no confidence. They're instead going to potentially look at cost of living. So is that a fair criticism, Pauline, really?
If he did a vote of no confidence, they would lose it. Boris would win it. So they will be wasting their time with an opposition day motion. I mean, they should do something that is important to the country, not just as party political, because just being party political isn't what the public want. They actually want to hear what people are really saying, and they need to be putting the questions to the government to be scrutinising government policy. That's what opposition does. But they don't do it at the moment. They're just fixated on one subject. And
that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. We're talking about how we would reduce energy bills by £200 for most people and another £600 for those who really need it. We're talking about how we learn to live well with COVID and make sure we've got the resources and the plans in place. These are important issues of the day that people care about. The government is not talking about these issues. It's only the Labour Party that's talking about them.
That's untrue. You say that you want to live well with COVID, but you've wanted us to go further and more when it's not been necessary. The Prime Minister has been proved right over COVID. It's not a case of just buttoning down. We see now Scotland are coming out of that because it hasn't worked. And actually,
It's simply not true. It's simply not true. We have supported...
OK, it's going to be difficult because you're all going to be talking over each other. So let me be in charge and bring in Alan Smith to respond to that, Alan. The way that Nicola Sturgeon has handled it, according to Pauline Latham, has been shown to be wrong. Your thoughts?
Well, that's demonstrable nonsense. The Scottish Government has taken a cautious approach on a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of data still to come out in this. And the very second we think it's safe to relax restrictions, we've shown that we do and we are and we will. So what we've done, we've taken a different approach on some matters over COVID to the UK, to England. I absolutely defend that record, and we'll have the inquiry as well. But the people of Scotland are comfortable with how the Scottish Government has dealt with this. That's why we just won an election. And I can see why Pauline would want to talk about lots of other issues. But the reason why we're talking about so many of these in crisis is because the people at the top of the UK government have been demonstrably asleep at the wheel and focused on other things. So I want this Tory psychodrama to get out of Scotland's government, which is why I want to see an independent Scotland. But meantime, the idea that the opposition's fixated on the Tory party, the only people fixated on the Tory party are the Tory party themselves.
What of what Pauline says that you won't bring a vote of no confidence because you'll lose it?
On that, to be fair, I actually would probably agree with her, and that's why we'll keep our powder dry. At the moment, we're focusing our debate on the cost of living crisis, but we'll keep our powder dry on that and we'll make a decision on that in due course.
OK, there is the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Let's listen in. Journalists there. Are you going to resign, Prime Minister? Pretty inevitable that he would face those questions. The Prime Minister now making that short journey from Downing Street onto Whitehall, down into Parliament Square and then on into the House of Commons. He has a great deal of work to do to persuade many Conservative MPs that he deserves their backing. We will leave our MPs panel there. Sarah Jones from Labour, Pauline Latham from the Conservative Party and Alan Smith from the SNP. Thank you all very much for giving us your thoughts in advance of Prime Minister's questions. And as the Prime Minister makes his way down to the House of Commons, let's bring in some other people who've got an interest in what is happening there today. We've got a public panel. We're going to talk to Tiffany Jones from Winchester. Her dad died from COVID-19 in December last year, the same day as the alleged Downing Street Christmas party. And in a moment, we're also going to talk to Karen, a psychiatric nurse in Manchester who worked through the pandemic and was fined thousands of pounds for organising a protest over NHS pay. We're also going to talk to a chef from Liverpool, and there he is, Paul Askew from the Art School restaurant. And in the middle, Karen Reisman, and the first guest is Tiffany Jones, who very sadly lost her dad. Three of you all, thank you so much for joining us. Tiffany, first of all, what did you make of the Prime Minister's interview yesterday? Do you think he is genuinely remorseful?
I don't think he knows how to be sorry. I think the only thing he's sorry about is the fact that he's been caught out. That's what he's sorry about. He's not sorry about the thousands of lives and the people that have been fined, frankly, unnecessarily, because if he can have a party, why can't everybody else? He's sorry he was caught.
What is there anything? I mean, you obviously don't like him. Is there anything he can do or say today that would change your mind, that would make you think, actually, this is somebody who perhaps acknowledges that they've made errors, but that they are now going to change and that they're now going to do the right thing?
I think we've had now what is nearly 2 years of this, and there isn't much that he can say or do. At this point, the kindest thing he could do is step down, let somebody else sort this mess out. He is a liar and he is unable and unfit for his office.
Very unparliamentary language there, Tiffany. Karen Reisman, a psychiatric nurse and also a union representative. You were fined, for holding an event during the lockdown period. Tell us what happened.
The government announced that they wanted health workers to get a 1% pay rise after a year of fighting COVID, a year of putting their lives on the line, a year of watching their colleagues die, a year of people being disabled, a year of being overwhelmed and exhausted beyond belief, and in the middle of a second wave where people were having to do it all over again. And, you know, they clapped us, they'd said that they respected us, and then they offered people 1%. And we knew as health workers that that was going to drive lots and lots of health workers out of the system who just couldn't take any more the fact that nothing was going to change. It was bad before COVID, and in COVID it was even worse. And to be given a below inflation kick in the teeth for the second year running, people were appalled, and we felt it necessary to organise.
Sorry to butt in on you. Paul, we'll come to you in a moment. In the meantime, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has some breaking news. Beth.
Yeah, we have some breaking news that a Conservative MP, Christian Wakeford, one of the 29 intake, has just defected to the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has just put these words out. He says, "I would like to welcome Christian Wakeford to the Labour Party. He's always put the people of Bury South first. As Christian said, the policies of the Conservative government are doing nothing to help the people of Bury South, and indeed are only making the struggles they face on a daily basis worse." He says, "Labour are the only ones who have put forward a plan to help people through the Tory cost of living crisis. I'm determined to build a new Britain, and I'm delighted that Christian has decided to join us in this endeavour." So just to be clear, the Conservative MP elected in 2019 for Bury South, Christian Wakeford, has just defected to the Labour Party minutes before the Prime Minister faces his party in the country at Prime Minister's questions.
Well, clearly interesting timing, isn't it? And one wonders what impact that will have on Boris Johnson, and the fact that he almost seems to be a little bit delayed coming out of number 10 there. I wonder if that information was being relayed to him. Will there be a by-election now? What happens?
No, he's defected to the Labour Party, so he will stand as a Labour MP. But it's quite astonishing for the Conservative Party that someone elected in that wave of seats falling from Labour seats, the red wall falling towards Boris Johnson in 2019, that he has decided to actually cross the floor of the House and join the Labour Party. That really is quite something. That is a body blow to Boris Johnson. And I actually, as a political editor, am quite shocked that announcement has come. It was rumoured this morning, my colleague Rob Powell was picking up some rumours about possible defections, but that someone has actually done that, and done that before the Sue Gray report has come out that the Prime Minister has asked everyone to wait for, is an indication, really, that those 2019ers, many of those MPs now think that Boris Johnson is an electoral liability to them, that while he helped win those seats and turn them Conservative blue in 2019, that they are just not confident that he can be the person that will win those seats again in the next general election. They're worried for their jobs. Christian Wakeford completely disillusioned, clearly, but also we know that there are a number of the other 2019ers now preparing to put letters in to try to force a confidence vote in Boris Johnson. And
somebody doing something like this, defecting to the other side, do you think that that will prompt more people to put letters in?
Well, that's the big question. Well, I think the first question is, are there going to be more defections? That's the obvious first question. This is obviously very live, so we will begin to hit the phones on that. And then the second question is, as you said, is politics is a confidence game, and over the past 48 hours, it does feel like the ball is now teetering, and Boris Johnson has been trying to shore up support, but it is bleeding away, and there is a growing view, and a view that is cementing, really, that he might not be able to get out of this, and he might not be the person to lead the Conservatives into the next general election. And certainly for an already very anxious, febrile party, the sight of a new Conservative MP, one of those who came in on that 80-seat majority that Boris Johnson won, but just over 2 years ago crossing the floor of the House to join Labour, he clearly thinks that that is where his political fortunes now lie, that he cannot sit on the Conservative benches. It will be absolutely devastating to the Prime Minister. Let's see what happens next.
Well, let's see. Beth, thanks very much for now. We'll be getting your reaction throughout the rest of the time around Prime Minister's questions. Let's just return, though, to our People's panel, who are just telling us their stories before Prime Minister's question starts. We hadn't had a chance yet to talk to Paul Askew, works in the hospitality sector, runs the Art School restaurant. Paul, for you, how was COVID and how difficult was it for you to comply with the regulations?
Well, I think it's been well documented that hospitality had a real kicking during the last 18 months, 2 years or so. You know, we spent thousands of pounds and time and effort and blood, sweat and tears to make our restaurants, bars and hotels COVID safe, and followed everything to the letter of the law, and in our opinion, went above and beyond and created the most safe environments that we could have ever done. And it all revolves around, following a plan, following the rules. And we believe we've done that. And of course, Now we're not out of this yet. We're still facing incredible difficulty with staffing crisis, supply chain, and we need strong leadership. And of course, if these things have happened, then it's no different than any other person in the world. They need to be prosecuted if they have to face fines, just like anybody else who broke the rules during the lockdown. And for me, it's not about politics. It's about what's right and what's wrong. And we very much have done things correctly. And we'd like to see a leadership that can help us recover now.
What about those in the government who will say it looks like that Plan B regulations are going to be relaxed later today, potentially? We'll find out after Prime Minister's questions. Our country is opening up faster than many other countries in the rest of the world, and economically we are now in a good place, and that is because of Boris Johnson. What would you say to that?
Well, I think, Plan B has worked, whether we all agree with the timing of things and the way it was treated over Christmas. Certainly that created huge issues for the hospitality industry. We had a massive sort of lockdown by stealth with cancellations of big bookings and groups. It sort of happened without the decree of the government anyway. So the management of that period was incredibly difficult. But you have to say the economy is starting to recover. We are seeing businesses starting to breathe again and look forward and be slightly more optimistic. So you have to give this a measured view in the bigger picture.
Let's go back to Karen Reisman, a psychiatric nurse. Karen, we cut you off in your prime there for that breaking news, but you were telling us how you were fined for holding an event that you very much tried to ensure was within the rules. What then went through your mind when you heard about the allegations of parties at Downing Street?
I just couldn't really believe that there is so much evidence that shows that they, not for any serious reason, but to party, to socialise, on a number of occasions, they have broken rules that the rest of us stuck to, that people made huge sacrifices over the last sort of nearly 2 years. And to find that the people who are enforcing those rules on other people are not keeping them themselves, I think is absolutely infuriating. I got fined £10,000, which it took me an enormous amount of effort and cost through a barrister in order to get them to finally admit that fine was unlawful. But to be honest, why did I have to go through that? And why is the Prime Minister and his civil servants and the police, I mean, they must have cameras inside Number 10 that have got the evidence. Why are we in the position where those people think that they can carry on and that they can carry on with the mess that they've made of COVID and with the hypocrisy of one rule for us and no rules for them?
Tiff Jones, you lost your dad, Colin, and one of the things that you want to do is create a memorial day for victims of COVID-19. There's been so much talk over the last few weeks about politics and parties. Do you fear that those who've been lost are perhaps being forgotten?
Every time another party gets made light of, it feels like a kick to the stomach, and people like my dad and the 175,000 other people are being swept under the carpet because it's COVID, it's going to be over soon, so let's just forget about it. I will never forget this. I lost my dad, quite frankly, to something that should have been preventable. If he'd shut down sooner and done things right and not partied, maybe my dad would still be here, but he's not.
OK. Tiffany Jones from Winchester, Karen Reisman from Manchester and Paul Askew from Liverpool. Thank you all so much for giving us the kind of thoughts that are going through your head just in advance of Prime Minister's questions. We'll leave that there and return to our political editor, Beth Rigby, who has more breaking news. Beth, you've got Christian Wakeford's statement.
Yeah, I've only just got it, so I will literally read it because it's only just been sent to me. This is what Christian Wakeford has told the Prime Minister over his decision to resign. He says, I'm writing to inform you of my decision to resign from the Conservative Party and apply to join the Labour Party. From today, I will be sitting as a Labour MP for Bury South because I've reached the conclusion that the best interests of my constituents are served by the programme put forward by Keir Starmer and his party. He goes on to say he cares passionately about the people of Bury South, and he's concluded that the policies of the Conservative government you lead are doing nothing to help the people of my constituency and indeed are only making the struggles they face on a daily basis worse. He goes on to say Britain needs a government focused on tackling the cost of living crisis. He then says it needs a government that upholds the highest standards of integrity and probity in public life. And sadly, both you and the Conservative Party as a whole have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves. He goes on, this is Christian Wakeford, the MP for Bury South, who's just defected to the Labour Party. He says, being elected as MP for Bury South was the proudest day of my life. I care passionately about the area and will always be grateful to those who supported me. And he says, I have wrestled with my conscience for many months, and you will know that I have made my policy misgivings clear on occasions in private, sometimes in public. I can no longer support a government that has shown itself consistently out of touch with the hard-working people of Bury South. And then he says, my decision's much more than about your leadership and the disgraceful way you have conducted yourself in recent weeks. However, I don't believe all politicians are the same, and I do believe in the power of politics, and so does Keir Starmer. He has shown that integrity in the way he has led the party on issues. That's it. And he concludes, changes can only be delivered by Labour government with Keir Starmer.
Wow, that is blistering.
That is quite something, isn't it? Yeah. Disgraceful,
the way that he thinks the Prime Minister has conducted himself, that the government needs to uphold the highest standards of probity and integrity, and that the government is not doing it.
And it seems there, Jane, I've literally just read that myself, but just my quick take on that, there's two things going on there. It's about the probity of the government and the integrity. He's very clear on that. He's obviously completely fed up with Boris Johnson, but also with the wider Conservative Party, because he doesn't think that they are upholding values that he ascribes to and believes many of his constituents do. So there's a personality issue with Boris Johnson and the way he leads his government. But he also talks, and this is very interesting, about the government not doing what it said it would, which was tackling the cost of living crisis.
It's always good to hear from you, but we also need to hear from the Prime Minister.
Yeah,
Prime Minister's
absolutely.
questions.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Question one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister, question one.
Mr. Speaker, I will shortly be updating the House on this country's fantastic progress in tackling COVID-19, including our booster programme, enabling us to ease Plan B measures and restore the ancient liberties of this country. Mr. Speaker, I know that the whole House will be delighted that Her Majesty the Queen has given permission for a special medal to be awarded to all those who deployed to Kabul. Operation Pitting saw our servicemen and women deliver the largest British evacuation since the Second World War. The whole country can be immensely proud of their service. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Wendy Chim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year we were told by the Prime Minister there were no Downing Street parties. Then it turned out there were parties, but we were assured that no rules were broken. Last week we heard that rules may have been broken, but that he thought it was a work event. And now yesterday from the man who wrote the rules, it was, well, nobody told me what those rules were. Mr. Speaker, 5 weeks ago the people of North Shropshire were clear, and the people of North East Fife are being clear to me now. No matter the excuse, there is no excuse for taking the British people for fools. Will the Prime Minister agree it is now time for him to resign?
No, Mr. Speaker, but what I can tell her is that, as I said to the House last week, I apologise sincerely for any misjudgments that were made, but she must contain her impatience, Mr. Speaker, and wait for the inquiry next week before she draws any of the conclusions that she's just asserted.
John Burrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Latest evidence and research shows that the UK is the most attractive country in the world amongst young people across the G20. Amid intense soft power competition from other countries, including China, can the Prime Minister assure me and other members of the British Council All-Party Group that the government will meet the British Council's funding requirements to ensure it doesn't have to close any more offices overseas, and to ensure that it commits all its energy to retaining our top spot.
Mr. Speaker, I entirely share my right honourable friend's enthusiasm for the British Council, which is a wonderful institution that we all love, and that's why we're providing through the FCDO £189 million of funding this year, a 27% increase, Mr. Speaker, in spite of all the difficulties this country is facing, 27% increase on the previous financial year. We've also provided a loan facility of up to £145 million to support all the wonderful work that the British Council does.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by warmly welcoming... Can I start...
Listen to the Prime Minister.
Can I just say, I expect people to listen to the Prime Minister. I certainly don't want the Leader of the Opposition shouted down. You might not like the day, but this is the day that we've got. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not bothered. I assumed it was directed over here. Can I start by warmly welcoming the honourable member for Bury South to his new place and to the Parliamentary Labour Party? Mr. Speaker, like so many people up and down the country, he has concluded that the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves, whereas the Labour Party stands ready to provide an alternative government that the country can be proud of. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party has changed, and so has the Conservative Party. He and anyone else who wants to build a new Britain built on decency, security, prosperity and respect is welcome in my Labour Party. Every week, the Prime Minister offers absurd and frankly unbelievable defences to the Downing Street parties, and each week it unravels.
I've been elected the chair. I don't need to be told how to conduct the business. So if somebody wants to do some direction, I'll start directing them out of the chamber. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I see the very noise. I'm sure the Chief Whip has told them to bring their own booze.
Order. Let's try and get on with questions. It's going to be a long day, if not. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, first he said there were no parties. Then the video landed, blowing that defence out the water. Next he said he was sickened and furious when he found out about the parties, until it turned out that he himself was at the Downing Street garden party. Then last week he said he didn't realise he was at a party, and, surprise, surprise, no one believed him. So this week, he's got a new defence. Nobody warned me that it was against the rules. That's it. Nobody told him. Since the Prime Minister wrote the rules, why on earth does he think that his new defence is going to work for him?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, he talks about the rules, and let me repeat what I said to the honourable lady across the aisle earlier on. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we must wait for the outcome of the inquiry. But I renew what I've said, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to his view,
nobody believes what you say. Can we have a little less? I want to this Prime Minister like I wanted to Leader of the Opposition. I want the same courtesy from both sides. Prime Minister.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, if we'd listened to the right honourable gentleman about COVID restrictions, which is the substance of his question, then, Mr. Speaker, we would still be we would have been in lockdown after July. If this is the truth, if we listened to the Labour front bench in the run-up to Christmas and New Year, Mr. Speaker, we would have stayed in restrictions with huge damage to the economy. And it's because of the judgments that I've taken and that we have taken in Downing Street that we now have the fastest growing economy in the G7 and GDP, Mr. Speaker, now back up above pre-pandemic levels. And as for Bury South, Mr. Speaker, as for Bury South, let me say to the right gentleman, Mr. Speaker, by all leave, may I say to the right honourable gentleman, that the Conservative Party won Bury South for the first time in generations under this Prime Minister, with an agenda of uniting and levelling up and delivering for the people of Bury South. And, Mr. Speaker, we will win again in Bury South at the next election under this Prime Minister.
Look, it's important I want to hear both sides, and I don't want this continuous chant, because if we do, there'll be less people on these benches, and the same on the other side. I expect both sides to be heard with courtesy. Keir Starmer.
Bury South is now a Labour seat, Prime Minister.
Sorry. Order. Did somebody want me to apologise? No, somebody shouted apologise. I hope it wasn't aimed at me. No. And so we'll also have less from that corner, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not only did he write the rules, but some of his staff say they did warn him about attending the party on the 20th of May 2020. Now, I've heard the Prime Minister's very carefully crafted response to that accusation. It almost sounds like a lawyer wrote it. So I'll be equally careful with my question. When did the Prime Minister first become aware that any of his staff had concerns about the 20th of May party?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to Right Honourable Gentleman for repeating the question that he's already asked. We have answered, Mr. Speaker, that it is for the inquiry to come forward with an explanation of what happened, and I'm afraid he simply must wait. But he asks about my staff, Mr. Speaker. He asks about my staff and what my staff are doing and what they have told me. And I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, that they have taken decisions throughout this pandemic that he has opposed to open up in July, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, to mount the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and Mr. Speaker, to double the speed of the booster rollout, with the result that we have the most open economy in Europe, Mr. Speaker, and we have more people in employment and more employees on the payroll now than there were before the pandemic began. That is what my staff have been working on in Downing Street, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud of them.
Keir Starmer.
So, Mr. Speaker, apparently Sue Gray is going to tell the Prime Minister when he first became aware that his staff had concerns about the May 20th. The Prime Minister's account gets more extraordinary with each version of his defence. If the Prime Minister's new defence were true, it requires him to suggest that his staff are not being truthful when they say they warned him about the party. It requires the Prime Minister to expect us to believe that whilst every other person who was invited on the 20th of May to the party was told it was a social occasion, he alone was told it was a work meeting. It also requires the Prime Minister to ask us to accept that as he waded through the empty bottles and platters of sandwiches, he didn't realise it was a party. Does the Prime Minister realise how ridiculous that sounds?
Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said about the events in Number 10. He will have to wait for the report. And Mr. Speaker, I think he asks for further clarification. I think there are lots of people who are interested. I say this entirely in passing, Mr. Speaker. Lots of people are interested in the exact legal justification from the learned leader of the opposition for the picture of him drinking a pint of beer or a bottle of beer. Mr. Speaker, perhaps he could tell the House about that in a minute, Mr. Speaker. But what I can tell the House is that throughout the pandemic, people across government have been working flat out to protect the British public with huge quantities of PPE, so we can now make 80% in this country, with the biggest and most generous furlough scheme virtually anywhere in the world, and the fastest. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, if we listened to them, we would have stayed in the European Medicines Agency, and we would never have been able to deliver the vaccine rollout at the speed that we did.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister thinks the only accusation he faces is that he once had a beer with a takeaway, then Operation Save Big Dog is in deeper trouble than I thought. If a Prime Minister misleads Parliament, should they resign?
So, Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear. The right honourable gentleman is continuing to ask a series of questions which he knows will be fully addressed by the inquiry. He is wasting this House's time. He's wasting the people's time, Mr. Speaker. He continues to be completely irrelevant, Mr. Speaker, because we have an inquiry. We have an inquiry, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not going to anticipate that inquiry any further. What I can tell him is that it is because of the judgments that were taken in Downing Street and because of the willingness of the British people to put trust, by the way, Mr. Speaker, in those judgments, to come forward in huge numbers to get vaccinated, which people did, and I thank them for it from the bottom of my heart. People did that because they listened to our messages, Mr. Speaker, and it's as a result of that that we now have the fastest growing economy in the G7 and youth unemployment, which he ought to care about, youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I know it's not going well, Prime Minister, but look on the bright side. At least the staff at number 10 know how to pack a suitcase. Mr. Speaker, last year, Her Majesty the Queen sat alone when she marked the passing of the man she'd been married to for 73 years. She followed the rules of the country that she leads. On the eve of that funeral, a suitcase was filled with booze and wheeled into Downing Street. A DJ played and staff partied late into the night. The Prime Minister has been forced to hand an apology to Her Majesty the Queen. Isn't he ashamed that he didn't hand in his resignation at the same time?
Mr. Speaker, I understand why the right honourable gentleman continues to politicise issues.
Sorry, Prime Minister. We normally would not, and quite rightly, mention the royal family. We don't get into discussions on the royal family.
Well, in that case, Mr. Speaker, I must ask the right honourable gentleman to withdraw it.
I've dealt with it. Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, are you going to...
Well, withdraw it.
Order. Prime Minister, we don't want to go through that again. I'll make the decisions. The answer is that the next question I'm going back to Keir Starmer to ask his final question. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst the Prime Minister wastes energy defending the indefensible, people's energy bills are rocketing. Yeah. Labour has a plan to deal with it. Axe VAT for everyone, provide extra support for the hardest hit, and pay for it with a one-off tax on oil and gas companies. A serious plan for a serious problem. What's the government offering? Yeah. Nothing. Too distracted by their own chaos to do their job. Yeah. While Labour was setting out plans to heat homes, he was buying a fridge to keep the party wine chilled. Yeah. While we were setting out plans to keep bills down, he was planning parties. Yeah. And while we were setting out plans to save jobs in the steel industry, he was trying to save just one job, his own. Yeah. Doesn't the country deserve so much better than this out of touch, out of control, out of ideas, and soon to be out of office Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what this government has been doing to look after the people of this country throughout this pandemic and beyond. We have been cutting the cost of living, helping them with the living wage. We've been cutting tax taxes for people on low pay, Mr. Speaker. We've been increasing payments for people suffering the costs of fuel.
Prime Minister, can I just say to Ron in here, our constituents wants to hear the questions and the answers. The great British public, the members of this United Kingdom which you're representing, they need to hear. Please, let's hear the questions and answers. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to look after people throughout this pandemic and beyond. But we've also, Mr. Speaker, been cutting crime by 10%, putting 11,000 more police officers already out on the street. Record home building last year, Mr. Speaker. More homes than at any time in the last 30 years. We are building 40 new hospitals, Mr. Speaker. Gigabit broadband has gone up from 9% coverage in our country to 65% already. And as I said already, I think 3 times or 4 times today, we have more people, more employees on the payroll now than before the pandemic began. And unemployment, youth unemployment, at a record low, Mr. Speaker. And when the history of this pandemic comes to be written, and the history of the Labour Party comes to be written, and believe me, they are history and will remain history, Mr. Speaker, it will show that we delivered while they dithered, and we vaccinated while they vacillated, Mr. Speaker. And the reason we've been able to lift restrictions faster than any other country in Europe, and we have the most open economy and the most open society in Europe, Mr. Speaker, is thanks to the booster rollout and thanks to the work of staff up and down Whitehall, across government, throughout the NHS, Mr. Speaker, and I am intensely proud of what this government has done.
If you let the questions come, Mark Palsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the excellent news on the economy and jobs, the Prime Minister will remember my question to him last June about proposals for a Gigafactory in Coventry. Last week, local councils granted outline planning permission to create 6,000 new skilled jobs, to secure many thousands of others, inject £2.5 billion into our local economy and level up across our region. With fast rising demand for greener and cleaner electric cars, may I ask him for his support to ensure the swift delivery of this vitally important project?
I thank my honourable friend for campaigning for this wonderful project, and we are supporting the electric vehicle industry. We made another £350 million available through the Automotive Transformation Fund, on top of the £500 million commitment that we've already made in the 10-point plan. And I know that the campaign for Coventry Airport is an excellent one. I look forward to seeing how it develops.
We now come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week was supposed to be Operation Save Big Dog, but it's quickly become Operation Dog's Dinner. Over the past few days, we've had more damaging revelations about Downing Street rule-making, more evidence that Parliament has been misled, and an even longer list of ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous excuses from the Prime Minister. First he claimed there were no parties. Then he wasn't present. Then he admitted he was at them, but he didn't know it was a party. And then, Mr. Speaker, the latest sorry excuse is really the most pathetic of them all. Nobody told me. Nobody told me. Nobody told the Prime Minister he was breaking his own rules. Absolutely pathetic. The Prime Minister, you know, what a look. The Prime Minister laughing once again, laughing at the British public. The Prime Minister is taking the public for fools. Nobody believes him. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility? Resign. Go, Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, but I thank him for his question again, and let me just remind him that there's an inquiry that is due to conclude. I believe he is wrong in what he asserts, Mr. Speaker, but we'll have to wait and see what the inquiry says. But, Mr. Speaker, I think the most important thing from the point of view of the UK government is that we're coming out of the restrictions that we've been in. I'm delighted to see that that's happening in Scotland as well, and that is very largely thanks to the wonderful cooperation that we continue to see across the whole of the UK, though you wouldn't believe it to hear it from him.
Here, Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid nobody is buying this Act anymore. There ought to be some respect and dignity from the Prime Minister. Let's remind ourselves, more than 150,000 of our citizens have died, and he's partying, he's laughing. Mr. Speaker, it simply isn't acceptable. The fake contrition, the endless excuses, the empty promises that it will be different only if we give him one last chance. This is a Prime Minister who arrogantly believes that he's above the rules, a Prime Minister who brazenly twists the truth, a Prime Minister who simply isn't fit for office. The Prime Minister's former Chief Advisor has said that he lied to Parliament, breaking the ministerial code. Prime Minister, a resignation offence. Public trust is hemorrhaging. With every day that passes, this Tory government loses even more credibility. When will the Tory MPs finally do the right thing? Show the Prime Minister the door.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman, but I must say that I disagree with him, and I think that when you look at the levels of trust that the British people people in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, across the whole country have shown in government, that there is the single biggest index, Mr. Speaker, of that trust has been their willingness to come forward voluntarily, Mr. Speaker, unlike many other countries in the world, to get vaccinated on a scale not seen anywhere else in Europe. And that is because of our ability and the NHS's ability to persuade people that it's the right thing. It's a fantastic thing. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, it's also a tribute to the United Kingdom, because that vaccine rollout was a UK effort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to exporting, as you're well aware, file punches well above its weight. And the Prime Minister saw this when he visited BAE Systems' Factory of the Future in Lancashire last year. In addition, fantastic local businesses such as Helical Technologies, Tangerine Holdings and Nature's Aid are doing a great job for flying the flag for Lancashire globally. But I've also got many smaller businesses who are eager to get exporting into new markets. What steps is the Prime Minister taking to help file businesses make the most of Brexit and maximise export potential?
Well, I thank him for championing. I thank him for what he's doing to champion trade with Latin America, and I've no doubt that small businesses such as Squire Hare are eager to get into those new markets, and we will do everything that we can to help and support him in his efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the cost of living crisis deepens, this government's priorities get ever more remote from my Kirkcaldy Cowdenbeath constituency. Only this week, I learned a veteran in my constituency, James Scott, took his own life as a result of his struggle with mounting financial pressures. This is a government who are found to have acted unlawfully by the High Court over Covid contracts and now preparing to write off £4.3 billion allocated to those Covid schemes. Why can the UK government find billions of pounds for profiteers and fraudsters, but they can't find compassion to treat the people with dignity, lifting the benefits cap and reinstating the cut to universal credit?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to say how sorry I am for what he's had to say about James Scott, and this government does as much as we can to support veterans, and that's why we published the Veterans Action Plan only the other day, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is ensuring that we support people throughout this crisis. He mentions, and I've said in my answer to the right honourable gentleman, many of the steps that we're taking to protect people on low incomes, and we will continue to do more, Mr. Speaker. He attacks the contracts for PPE. Actually, I think it was an astonishing thing at great speed to be able to give this country 17 billion items of PPE, thanks to the efforts of people across Whitehall. Mr. Speaker, this country is now capable of producing 80% of our own PPE.
Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shortly before Christmas, my constituent, Oliver Freckleton, was found at home having been stabbed to death on the eve of his 20th birthday. Yesterday, his heartbroken parents held their son's funeral. Oliver leaves behind a partner and a baby daughter, and 2 teenagers have been arrested for his murder. Now, this tragic event leaves behind a devastated family, friends, and a very worried community. I'm grateful for the work that Staffordshire Police is undertaking to tackle violent crime in my constituency, and the extra 149 additional police officers recruited is very welcome. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that a multi-stakeholder approach is vital to tackling crimes amongst our young people? And what can the government do to support not just the police, but schools, colleges and local authorities in working to address this issue?
My honourable friend, first of all, I'm very sad to hear the news of the loss of her constituent, Oliver. And like so many victims of violent crime, the answer, as is the case with so many victims, the answer is not just policing, though that is vitally important, and that's why we're investing so massively in 20,000 more police officers and supporting them with toughening the law, Mr. Speaker. But it's also, as she rightly says, important to get all the institutions of the state to work together: schools, colleges, social services, and the health service, mental health service as well.
Jessica Morton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Why is it so hard for this Prime Minister to admit that he made the rules, so he should know the rules and he should follow the rules? Everyone out there knows it's as simple as that. And if he had any shred of compassion for all those out there who've suffered through this, he'd go.
Mr. Speaker, I entirely understand people's feelings, and I entirely support what she says about obeying the rules when you make the rules. She's completely right. On the other hand, I do urge her to wait, as I've said to the benches of it, to wait until next week.
Paul Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition have been told there's going to be an inquiry. They've raised every single question on one issue. Well, my constituents wants to get on with other things. In January 2021, the government estimated that at least 800 million will be released from the Dormant Assets Scheme extension. Does he agree with me that funding through a new community wealth fund will be a catalyst to level up the most left-behind communities, and the bill should include specific provision for a consultation on the scope, shape and nature of such a fund?
Mr. Speaker, we certainly are legislating to, thank you very much, we will be legislating to expand the Dormant Assets Scheme to include new financial assets, which would unlock an estimated £880 million. We'll be considering how to spend the English portion of that, and the Community Wealth Fund that he proposes is certainly an option, and I thank him very much.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Anne has told me a friend saw the ambulance outside the house on the night Anne's husband died. She wasn't allowed to go into the house to comfort her friend. Anne's husband went to his rest in an almost empty building, while scores of his friends stood freezing outside. Anne went home to an empty house to grieve the rest of the day alone. My constituent Susan wasn't allowed to go in the ambulance or even follow the ambulance, blue light and all, after her husband had a heart attack. Other constituents had the heartbreaking realisation they weren't allowed to go into care homes to break the news in person to their relatives that someone else in the family had died. Mr. Speaker, in their words, not mine, in their words, the Prime Minister is a charlatan, a hypocrite and a liar. What will he now say to my constituents?
Look, I know you're repeating what your constituents said. I want more moderate and temperate language. Prime Minister, you might just want to deal with the general question, certainly not the answer.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to repeat that I understand the feelings that he has relayed to me. As I said I said last week, and I sympathise very deeply with the feelings, and I understand why people feel as they do. And I thank people very much for everything they have done. I recognise the enormous sacrifice that people have made. I apologise for misjudgments that may have been made in number 10 by me and anybody else, but please can I ask him to wait for the inquiry to conclude.
Andrew Lower.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently attended a debate held by my honourable friend for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine seeking a central London memorial for the photographic reconnaissance unit. And in it I referenced my Northampton South constituent, mosquito pilot, Mr. George Pritchard, who is 98 next week and is one of the last surviving members of the unit. Will the Prime Minister join my honourable friend, me and Mr. Pritchard in backing this fitting and needed memorial?
I thank him very much, and I will certainly do what I can to support it, though, of course, as he knows, the memorial to George Pritchard, though, as he knows, this is a matter for local authorities. What this House and what this government can certainly do is ensure that memorials are not desecrated, as they have been across this country, and make sure that we support legislation that penalises those who indulge in such desecration, Mrs.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when a Prime Minister is spending his time trying to convince the great British public that he's actually stupid rather than dishonest, isn't it time that he goes now?
Mr. Speaker, I think that was a question for you rather than me, but I'm not. Look, I've made my point. I think that the British public have responded to what this government has had to say in the most eloquent way possible. They have beaten COVID so far, Mr. Speaker. They have helped to defeat COVID so far, Mr. Speaker, with the steps they have taken by getting vaccinated and implementing Plan B, and I thank them.
Just for the Prime Minister, for the record, it's not Speaker's questions. Sir Robert Goodall.
Our armed forces have earned the respect and admiration of our nation, not least during the pandemic. On Remembrance Sunday, we commemorate their sacrifices, but on Armed Forces Day, on the 25th of June, we will celebrate all that is amazing about our Army, Navy and Air Force. In a normal year, we get about 20,000 people at the event in Scarborough, but this year we will finally host, after twice being postponed, National Armed Forces Day. Will the Prime Minister pull out all the stops on land, sea and air to make this truly an event to remember?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that Armed Forces Day will be absolutely spectacular across the country, and that Scarborough will make a terrific contribution and a notable contribution as well.
Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last April, I asked the Prime Minister if he agreed with the principle that politicians shouldn't lie. He replied that he concurred with the basic principle that the honourable gentleman has just enunciated. Would he like to amend the record?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of people, and indeed politicians across Northern Ireland, believe that whatever the question, double jobbing is not the answer. Could I urge my right honourable friend to listen to the majority and ask him not to move the government amendment in the other place later today?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I'm advised that I think the amendment in question is indeed going to be withdrawn.
Twist.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents are rightly angry at the Prime Minister's behaviour. But while Downing Street fights to save his political life, people across the North East are worrying about rising food and energy bills, rising unemployment and rising levels of child poverty. He talks about levelling up, but my constituents are seeing opportunities cut. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that his government has failed and it's time for him to go?
No, Mr. Speaker, I really don't agree with her, and I don't think she could have been following anything that's being said this afternoon. We have unemployment falling to near record lows, Mr. Speaker, and we have job vacancies. We have job vacancies at record highs, Mr. Speaker. That's what Conservative governments do. They create jobs and they get the economy moving.
David Davis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many on these benches, I spent weeks and months defending the Prime Minister against often angry constituents. I reminded them of his success in delivering Brexit and on the vaccine and many other things. But I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Order. Prime Minister.
I must say to the right honourable gentleman, I don't know what he's talking about, but what I can tell him, I don't know what quotation he's alluding to that he's referring. But what I can tell him is that I think I've told this House repeatedly throughout this pandemic, I take full responsibility for everything done in this government and throughout the pandemic.
Stephen Kinnock.
Does the Prime Minister agree with the Leader of the House that the Leader of the Scottish Conservatives is a lightweight?
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative approach to the Union is one that I think is right for our country. We want to keep it together, and I think Conservatives in Scotland do an excellent job, and that's why their stout defiance, their stout defence of the Union was repaid at the last election, and Labour, Mr. Speaker, is increasingly endangering our unions.
Clayton Drummond.
Mr. Speaker, and many people last week welcomed the 5-year moratorium on smart motorways. However, the M27 is due to be open as a smart motorway in a couple of months. What reassurance can my right honourable friend give my constituents in Meon Valley and others in the rest of South Hampshire that the M27 will be safe and give them confidence to use it?
I thank her very much, and I can assure her that we're well aware of the risks associated with the smart motorway scheme. I know that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, is looking at it right now.
We now come to the Prime Minister's COVID-19 statement. I now call the Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will make a statement on our progress against Omicron.
Prime Minister, just let the room clear a little bit. Order. Can we please leave quickly and quietly? What a day. Prime Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will make a statement on our progress against Omicron and the review of our Plan B measures. Within hours of learning from scientists in South Africa about the emergence of a new COVID variant last November, this government acted, introducing balanced and proportionate restrictions at our borders to slow the seeding of Omicron in our country. As we learned more about this highly transmissible new variant, we implemented the Plan B measures we had prepared precisely in case our situation deteriorated, encouraging people to change their behaviour to slow the spread of the virus and buying crucial time to get boosters into arms. We made the big call to refocus our National Health Service, necessarily requiring the difficult postponement of many other appointments so that we could double the speed of the booster programme. And thanks to the extraordinary efforts of our NHS and its volunteers, we delivered the fastest booster programme in Europe, reaching half our population before any other European country, with more than 36 million boosters now in arms across the UK, including more than 90% of all over 60s in England. And taking a balanced approach, we resisted calls from others to shut down our country all over again. Many nations across Europe have endured further winter lockdowns. Many have seen hospitality curfews and nightclubs closed, capacity limits at sports stadiums, the return of social distancing, and in some places, Christmas and New Year as good as cancelled. But this government took a different path. We kept England open, and we supported those businesses which faced reduced demand because of the response to Plan B measures. And while we must continue to remain cautious, the data are showing that time and again this government got the toughest decisions right. Today's latest ONS data show clearly that infection levels are falling in England, and while there are some places where cases are likely to continue rising, including in primary schools, our scientists believe it is likely that the Omicron wave has now peaked nationally. There remain, of course, significant pressures on the NHS across our country, and especially in the North East and North West. But hospital admissions, which were doubling every 9 days just 2 weeks ago, have now stabilised, with admissions in London even falling, and the numbers in intensive care not only remain low, but are actually also falling. So, this morning, the Cabinet concluded that because of the extraordinary booster campaign, together with the way the public have responded to the Plan B measures, we can return to Plan A in England and allow Plan B regulations to expire. As a result, from the start of Thursday next week, mandatory certification will end. Organisations can, of course, choose to use the NHS COVID pass voluntarily, but we will end the compulsory use of COVID status certification in England. From now on, the government is no longer asking people to work from home. And people should now speak to their employers about arrangements for returning to the office. And having looked at the data carefully, the Cabinet concluded that once regulations lapse, the government will no longer mandate the wearing of face masks anyway. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow we will no longer require face masks in classrooms, and the Department for Education will shortly remove national guidance on their use in communal areas. In the country at large, we will continue to suggest the use of face coverings in enclosed or crowded spaces, particularly when you come into contact with people you don't normally meet, but we will trust the judgment of the British people and no longer criminalise anyone who chooses not to wear one. The government will also ease restrictions further on visits to care homes, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, will set out plans in the coming days. Mr. Speaker, as we return to Plan A, the House will know that some measures still remain, including those on self-isolation. In particular, it is still a legal requirement for those who have tested positive for COVID to self-isolate. On Monday, we reduced the isolation period to 5 full days with 2 negative tests, and there will soon come a time when we can remove the legal requirement to self-isolate altogether, just as we don't place legal obligations on people to isolate if they have flu. As COVID becomes endemic, we will need to replace legal requirements with advice and guidance, urging people with the virus to be careful and considerate of others. The self-isolation regulations expire on the 24th of March, at which point I very much expect not to renew them. Indeed, were the data to allow, I would like to seek a vote in this House to bring that date forwards. In advance of that, we will set out our long-term strategy for living with COVID-19, explaining how we hope and intend to protect our liberty and avoid restrictions in future by relying instead on medical advances, especially the vaccines, which have already saved so many lives. But to make that possible, we must all remain cautious during these last weeks of winter. When there are still over 16,000 people in hospital in England alone, the pandemic is not over. And, Mr. Speaker, make no mistake, Omicron is not a mild disease for everyone, especially if you're not vaccinated. Just look at the numbers in intensive care in other countries where vaccination rates are far lower. Indeed, from our NHS data, we know that around 90% of people in intensive care are not boosted. So I urge members across the House to do everything possible to encourage any remaining constituents who have not done so to get boosted now. And for the next few weeks, I encourage everyone across the country to continue with the behaviours that we know help to keep everybody safe. Washing hands, letting fresh air in, getting tested, self-isolating if positive, and, as I say, thinking about wearing a face covering in crowded and enclosed settings. Mr. Speaker, Omicron tested us just as Alpha and Delta did before. But let's remember some of what we've achieved. We were the first nation in the world to administer a vaccine. We were the fastest in Europe to roll it out, because outside the European Medicines Agency, this government made the big call to pursue our own British procurement strategy rather than opting back into the EU scheme, as some people urged. We created a world-beating testing programme, the largest in Europe, Mr. Speaker, and procured the most antivirals of any country in Europe too, because this government made the big call to invest early in lateral flow tests and in cutting-edge drugs to protect the most vulnerable. We've delivered the fastest booster campaign in Europe, and we are the first to emerge from the Omicron wave, because the government made the big call to focus on our NHS and to refocus our activity and lead that campaign to get boosted now. And that's why we've retained the most open economy and society anywhere across the European continent and the fastest growing economy in the G7. Because we made that tough decision to open up last summer when others said that we shouldn't, and to keep things open over the winter when others wanted them shut, Mr. Speaker. This week, the World Health Organization said that while the global situation remains challenging, the United Kingdom can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And, Mr. Speaker, this is no accident of history. Exactly. Confronted by the nation's biggest challenge since the Second World War and the worst pandemic since 1918, any government would get some things wrong, but this government got the big things right, Mr. Speaker, and I commend this statement to the House.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. Throughout the pandemic, the British public have made enormous sacrifices to limit the spread of the virus, staying at home, social distancing and, unlike the Prime Minister, cancelling parties. I would like to thank everybody who has followed the rules. I'd like to thank the NHS staff and volunteers who rolled out the booster jab. The Labour Party does not want to see restrictions in place any longer than necessary. We will support the relaxation of Plan B as long as the science says that it is safe. So can the Prime Minister share the scientific evidence behind his decision and reassure the public that he's acting to protect their health, not just his job? The 438 deaths recorded yesterday are a solemn reminder that this pandemic is not over. We need to remain vigilant, learn the lessons from the government's mistakes. With new variants highly likely, we must have a robust plan to live well with COVID. So where is it? He's too distracted to do the job. And it's not just the Prime Minister who's letting us down. Where's the Health Secretary's plan to prepare for another wave of infections? Why isn't the Chancellor working with British manufacturers to shore up our domestic supplies of tests? Where is the Foreign Secretary's plan to help vaccinate the world? They're all too busy plotting their leadership campaigns to keep the public safe. While the Conservative Party tear themselves apart, jostling for position, looking inward, the Labour Party is focused on the national interest, filling their void. We have a plan that the Prime Minister doesn't. We would train and retain a reserve army of volunteer vaccinators. We will build a supply of test kits made in Britain to protect us from global shortages. We would raise statutory sick pay and make all workers eligible, keep schools open by improving ventilation, break the endless cycle of new variants by playing our part in vaccinating the world. We would produce a roadmap for decision-making to ensure efficient action when it's demanded. We'd stop the short-sighted sell-off of the UK's vaccine manufacturing centre, and we would never again allow our NHS and social care service to be so run down and underfunded, understaffed and overstretched as it has been over the last decade of a Tory government. Mr. Speaker, Labour has a plan to live well with COVID and secure our lives, livelihoods and liberties. Where's his?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to share the scientific advice on which we've taken this decision, of course, and he conceded it's there for everybody to consult. But he asks about our testing abilities, Mr. Speaker. We're conducting about 1.25 million tests a day. We have the biggest capability to do tests of any country in Europe. We've built, as I promised the House, Mr. Speaker, and he attacked me at the time. I said, well, we have a world-beating testing industry, a massive diagnostics facility, which we never had before. He attacks the government over the distribution of vaccines to the rest of the world. We've already done 30 million. We'll do 100 million by June, Mr. Speaker, and 2.5 billion AstraZeneca vaccines have been distributed around the world, thanks to the deal the UK government did with AstraZeneca, so that those vaccines are distributed at cost price. He talks about funding the NHS. That party, Mr. Speaker, voted against the funding that we're going to need to clear the COVID backlogs and fund our NHS. Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, he has been absolutely shameless in veering from one position to the next, and he has been wrong. He has been wrong about virtually every single important decision. He was wrong about keeping schools open, Mr. Speaker. Do you remember he consistently refused to say that they were safe because of what his paymasters in the union were telling him? He was wrong about going forward from lockdown in July, on July the 19th. He said it was reckless. Do you remember, Mr. Speaker? He was totally wrong. He was wrong about, the Labour front bench were wrong about going through Christmas and New Year with Plan B, as we did. They said we needed a roadmap back to lockdown. He did. That guy did. Oh no, wait, it was Ashwin. Maybe it was you. That guy. They said they wanted a roadmap back to lockdown, Mr. Speaker. At every step, and above all, Mr. Speaker, they tried to undermine the vaccine task force and to say that you could not spend money. They said you should not be spending £675,000 of taxpayers' money on outreach to vaccine-hesitant groups. That's their idea of priority spending, Mr. Speaker. He has been, it's been absolutely miserable listening to the opposite bench because they have had nothing useful to say. They have flip-flopped opportunistically from one position to the other. And, Mr. Speaker, did you get any idea from what he said just now whether or not he supports what we're doing? No. So he does support it. Okay, he supports it this week, Mr. Speaker. But what you can be certain of, Mr. Speaker, is that if he thinks that there's any political opportunity in opposing it next week, he won't hesitate to do so. He's been Captain Hindsight throughout, Mr. Speaker. Captain Hindsight, and he's had absolutely nothing useful to say or to contribute.
Lisa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my entry in the Members' Register. Can I say to my right honourable friend that many of my constituents work in the aviation sector? I welcome the announcement he's made about Plan B restrictions today, but I note he made no reference to the tests that are still required for people coming into England. If we're going to learn to live with COVID, we need to facilitate travel. So will he take this opportunity to announce that when Plan B restrictions are removed next week, the government also make it clear that there will be no test requirements for anybody entering England who is fully vaccinated?
I thank my right honourable friend. We're certainly reviewing the testing arrangements for travel, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will be making a statement in the next few days on that, Mr. Speaker. But I think it's very important that everybody in the country understands that getting your booster, wherever you want to go in the world, getting your booster is going to be a pretty crucial thing to do.
We now come to Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. We're all grateful that the data suggests that we've turned a corner in the Omicron wave, and that the success of the vaccination programme in particular gives us cause to be hopeful in the months ahead. But though declining, the level of infection is still undoubtedly high, and the NHS remains under pressure. That is why caution is the key, rather than the PM strategy of throwing caution to the wind. Baseline measures of face coverings and indoor public places and working from home where possible, which Scotland still has in place throughout, are extremely important in the weeks ahead, as is the guidance on lateral flow test. So, will the Prime Minister guarantee, and maybe if he can come off his phone, because this is important, so will the Prime Minister guarantee that lateral flow tests will remain free as they are required and put to bed speculation that they will be removed free at the point of need? But, Mr Speaker, while the data gives us cause to be optimistic, the real problem for the Prime Minister is that no matter what the data has said today, he had no choice but to throw caution to the wind. The pathetic and unbelievable excuses that he doesn't know his own rules have left the Prime Minister weak. The Prime Minister is unable to lead on this issue or on any other. And the public can't trust a single word that the Prime Minister says. Any shred of credibility has gone. In a global pandemic, which is what the World Health Organization is cautioning, is nowhere near over, and during which new variants are likely to emerge, it is deeply concerning that we have a Prime Minister like this at the helm who simply is not fit to lead. And even though, thankfully, the figures give us cause to be hopeful, it's clear that the Prime Minister cannot carry on when his credibility has all gone.
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I repeat the points I made earlier on to the right honourable gentleman, and I think that the whole effort, the reason we're in the state that we are, is because of the immense cooperation there's been across the whole of the UK. He talks about testing, and of course we'll keep lateral flow tests free for as long as is necessary. But testing has been a fantastic example of union collaboration. I've seen for myself tests being been assessed in Glasgow that were coming from people in Sussex. It's been I've seen the work of the UK Armed Services helping people across the whole of the UK to move people who needed treatment to wherever. It has been a fantastic example of union collaboration. I hope he bears that in mind.
Absolutely. We now come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the height of the first wave, this government had the courage to pre-order 400 million doses of vaccine without even knowing if they worked, and that has laid the foundations for us having the best vaccine programme of any large country. So I welcome today's announcement. It won't surprise the Prime Minister, though, if I draw his attention to the fact that NHS doctors and nurses are absolutely shattered. He will have seen this week that 1 in 6 doctors say that they have had near misses or harmed patients because of exhaustion. So if he doesn't want to accept the Select Committee's recommendations to address the workforce crisis, what will he do to give hope to our brilliant frontline staff?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to, my right honourable friend has a great deal of expertise in this matter. I want to thank everybody in the NHS, all staff, frontline and all staff for what they've been doing. And I know he's right of what he says about how tired people are. They're exhausted, Mr. Speaker, but they're also working heroically and doing an incredible job. And it's because there are 17,000 COVID cases that, as I said, we've got to remain cautious, in spite of what the general opposite was saying. We do need to remain cautious, and we need to make sure that we continue to recruit for our amazing NHS. There are now 44,000 more healthcare professionals, Mr. Speaker, than there were in 2020, and that's as a result of the recruitment by this government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the vaccine still remains one of the best defences against this virus, but over the past month we have seen a slowing in the booster vaccination rate. So can the Prime Minister update the House as to when he expects a completion date for the booster vaccination, but also can he set out a plan as to how he is going to encourage take-up of the vaccination among certain groups, particularly young people?
Prime Minister, she makes an incredibly important point. I'm grateful to her because there is a job of work for all of us to do in reaching out to groups who and it's at the moment it's not actually hesitancy, it's more apathy that's the problem. It's because Omicron is seen wrongly to be a mild disease, that people are not getting the vaccine in the way that they might. And we need to break down that apathy with those groups, and we're doing everything we can to do that. The numbers are rising the whole time, but we want them to rise faster.
Andrew Lutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You would think that today of all days, opposition benches could be delighted for our great United Kingdom, delighted that legal restrictions could come to an end soon, delighted about the amazing vaccine rollout, and delighted about the strength of our economy. All a superb team effort led by my right honourable friend. But can he reassure me that in the work that looks post-fact, that he will very carefully assess the lockdown impact on people having babies, and in particular those who are separated from their partners, who are unable to take part in the birth experience with them, which is so vital for giving every baby the best start for life?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for what she has just said, and her point about birth partners being able to attend is unbelievably important, and I'm glad that we were able to address it in spite of some difficulties. And her Early Start for Life programme is unbelievably important, and I know that both my right honourable friend for Education and for Health are working with her to deliver it.
Dave.
Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister had to accept that he was unaware of what his own COVID rules actually allowed. With millions of British people now seeing that the Prime Minister can't even grasp what his own basic rules are, he's no longer a credible person to set the rules for others during this public health crisis. Isn't it time he accepted that the House and the country can no longer trust him with the nation's health? And the best policy to beat COVID now will be for him to resign.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, ni hao, as we say to the right honourable gentleman. 人心里很高兴. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with him. I want to go on and deliver on the people's priorities. This government was elected with an enormous mandate to unite and level up across our country, and that is what we're going to do.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Prime Minister will forgive me for not being extraordinarily grateful for the withdrawal of these measures. I and many colleagues on these benches didn't think they were necessary in December, but I do nonetheless welcome their removal. Can I draw his attention to a further policy which I think it would be helpful if he reconsidered? The government's current plan is to say to our valuable NHS staff that if they refuse to be vaccinated, they're to be sacked. And those sackings are to commence in a couple of weeks' time with no compensation. We know, and we know now, that the Secretary of State is being advised by his own officials due to the lack of protection against transmission, that this needs to be rethought. Can I urge the Prime Minister to rethink this policy? We shouldn't reward our NHS staff for all their dedication with the sack. We should allow them to continue in the valuable work that they deliver to our great country.
Minister.
I thank him very much, and I respect very much the points of view that he's put across consistently throughout this pandemic, and it's been very important that we've had a voice speaking up for freedom in the way that he has. But I have to think also of those who will be at the bedside of elderly and vulnerable people who are dying of nosocomially acquired COVID, and their feelings about our failure to get vaccination rates up high enough within the NHS. And it's a very, very grim problem, as I'm sure he can understand, Mr. Speaker. And nobody wants to have compulsory vaccination, but since the policy was announced, rates of vaccination within the NHS have gone up notably, and that's a positive thing. We will reflect on the way ahead. We don't want to drive people out of the service, but it is a professional responsibility of everybody looking after the health of others within our NHS to get vaccinated, and I hope he agrees with that.
Wayne Davis.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me? But unlike someone who attended bring your own booze parties, the Welsh First Minister Mark Wakeford has behaved with decency and integrity throughout this entire pandemic.
It's certainly been, I think the collaboration across England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland has been exemplary, and I've enjoyed working with our partners and will continue to do so.
Edward Tibbs. Very much, Mr. Speaker. I refer honourable members to my entry in the register. And can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today, and particularly the decision to now remove face masks from schools. I know many children and staff, pupils and parents will be extremely pleased that is now happening. But I know he will also share my concern, and that of the Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza, that during the pandemic we've seen many thousands of children who have become off the radar of schools, off school rolls. And particularly the most vulnerable children, this causes serious problems about their exposure to crime and exploitation. So will he look again at some of the recommendations in my review of school exclusion to try and address this, so that we can track every pupil who is of a school age? Because we should have as a basic principle knowing that every child is in school, where they're in school, and what their future is to be.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is an expert in this, and he's spot on in what he says. I don't want to see excluded kids being locked in a cycle of ever-growing deprivation. He's absolutely right. The best place for kids is in school. That's why we worked so hard to keep schools open and to insist that they were safe.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was listening carefully to the Prime Minister's statement. I don't think he mentioned long COVID once. Yet, according to the ONS, over 1 million people are living with this debilitating condition. Yesterday, the all-party group on coronavirus heard heartbreaking testimony from frontline NHS workers who are living with long COVID, and many of whom cannot return to work because of this condition. Will he now commit to formally recognising long COVID as an occupational disease and launch a compensation scheme for frontline workers who are left unable to work after catching COVID whilst on the front line of our pandemic response?
Prime Minister.
I thank, and I really understand the concerns of people with long COVID. Everybody knows people who've had an experience with COVID that has gone on far longer than many others, and who've had a genuinely debilitating time. And we are looking at it. The research continues, and we will do whatever we can to support people with long COVID. But there's a deal of work still to be done.
Let's have the most exciting man, Sir Desmond Swain.
Thank you. Can I welcome wholeheartedly the announcements that have been made today? And I would ask the Prime Minister to review again the need to sack domiciliary workers and NHS workers, and to examine that evidence that suggests that they pose a risk to their statements, when our belief is that they won't any more than unvaccinated.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, but I think the evidence is clear that healthcare professionals should get vaccinated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rush to remove the requirement for masks, including on public transport, will cause people to fall ill and die unnecessarily. Isn't this all about saving the Prime Minister's political skin, not about protecting public health? What a moral failure, and what a bad way to go.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I notice that he's at variance with his front bench on that point, not for the first time. I don't think he's right. I think we should trust to the judgment of the British people, and that's what we're going to do.
Mr. Mac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to welcome today's statement and the review of the Plan B measures. And like colleagues here on this side of the House, I too want to question on behalf of the 100,000 NHS workers the mandatory vaccination, given the Chief Medical Officer told MPs that vaccinations had a minimal impact on transmission. Isn't it the case now there is no reason at all for mandatory vaccinations for care workers and NHS staff? Over the last 2 years, these people have worked tirelessly on the front line, and we have clapped these key workers. Can the Prime Minister now make sure that he doesn't sack them? It is utterly unjustifiable.
Prime Minister.
I understand her point, but I must say that the NHS fully supports the policy because of out of considerations for patient safety. And I would just repeat what I've said to several members. I really think it's the duty of healthcare professionals to get vaccinated.
Adam Kazar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After he called for the Prime Minister's resignation over Partygate, the branch manager of the Scottish Conservatives was referred to as a lightweight by the Leader of the House. I simply ask, how does the Prime Minister think he can maintain his position and continue to issue rules and advice on COVID when he can't follow the rules himself?
At some point you do.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with her with the greatest respect, and she will have to wait to see whenever the inquiry concludes. But Mr. Speaker, I think that the work on rules and guidance, which we've done together with our friends and partners in the Scottish administration, has been exemplary, and it's helped this whole country to come out of COVID faster than any other European country.
Siobhan Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, particularly about masks, and I hope they never ever return in our schools. But sadly, it felt to many of us that were concerned about the Plan B measures that there was no learning from the last 2 years, and we've had the impact on businesses, including my beloved wedding sector, has been quite serious, with fears about the next winter already affecting bookings. Will my right honourable friend confirm that we're learning from facts and not just models to give confidence that our response to the next variant, because it will come, will be assessed accordingly?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and if she wants to look at other European countries, I share her enthusiasm for the weddings industry and business. It's a fantastically important business, and a massive employer in our country. But other European countries, I hesitate to make this point again, Mr. Speaker, have been in a far worse state when it comes to the closures and the restrictions they've been forced to impose. I'm thrilled that we've been able to open up in the way that we have and get people married in the style and pomp that they want.
Murray Rimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, there is a group of vulnerable people who are not able to receive the booster. They've inquired through the CCGs, the doctors, NHS England. There is a blockage in the system. They've had 3 injections, but the 3rd one doesn't count as a booster. And they were told they'd get the 4th, but they cannot access it. Please intervene and get people talking to unblock this.
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much, and we're working fast to unblock it so that the people get the 4th jab as fast as possible.
David Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today? Can I ask him if he will not just remove the work-from-home guidance, but actively encourage people to return to the office? Because it's not just good for the economy, it's particularly important for younger workers who can't get the skills, experience and networks they need by working from home.
Prime Minister.
Yes. Well, Mr. Speaker, I do agree with that, and I think that actually across Whitehall we need to show a lead and make sure that we get back to work, everybody gets back to work. It is safe to do so, provided everybody exercises the due caution that I've set out today. But I entirely agree with my honourable friend.
Mick Whittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are mercifully in a much better position today than we were this time a year ago, and that's thanks to the heroic efforts of the NHS in roll-out vaccinations. But just 9% of people living in Africa have been vaccinated against COVID-19 to date. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the UK is failing to honour its humanitarian obligations to the poorest countries in the world, and will he commit his government to supporting a waiver of intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines?
Prime Minister.
I agree with him, Mr. Speaker, about the importance of vaccinating the world. No one's safe till everybody's safe. That is clear. And we must get more vaccines to Africa in particular. I've talked to colleagues in in African governments, African leaders, about what we can do to have more fill and finish in Africa, what we can do to encourage Africa's own supply of vaccination. That's the best long-term answer. But what we need to do in the meantime is donate our vaccines, which is what we're doing. The UK is donating 100 million, as I told the House earlier, by June, but also to continue the rollout of the AstraZeneca jab, which, don't forget, has basically been underwritten by the British state in the sense that it is delivered at cost, thanks to the deal that we did. And that's in addition to the £548 million that we've given to COVAX and the investment in Gavi as well. So the UK, I think, has a proud record on vaccinating the world, but there is clearly much, much more that the world needs to do, and I agree with him about that.
Right. It's a warm welcome for the return to Plan A from me, Mr. Speaker. I hope it is irreversible this time. Now, the Prime Minister knows our young people have missed out on so much, and now they face punishment for doing the right thing when it comes to travel, especially our teenagers. They cannot prove, Prime Minister, that they've had 2 jabs on the NHS app if they're under 16 because they can't access it. Even if they can access a sort of cumbersome process involving a letter from the NHS, those with 1 jab and a recent infection, they cannot prove that at all. That effectively grounds them. Now, Prime Minister, half-term is coming. Family memories are now. They're not at some point in the future. Please, can we urgently, with the Health Secretary sitting next to him, find a way that teenagers are treated with fairness and parity with their parents on these important issues so they can get on with their lives with their families?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an extremely important point about young people and vaccination. I do think that people need to appreciate the value of vaccination for ease of travel, particularly boosters, but it should be as simple as possible for young people. I totally agree with him about that. And I know that my right honourable friend will make a statement in the next few days about what we propose to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, there you have it, Prime Minister's questions and an announcement on the ending of Plan B by the Prime Minister. A pretty brutal Prime Minister's questions, bookended by the defection of a Conservative MP to the Labour side at the beginning and a call from David Davis on his own side to resign at the end. Let's take you through all the details of what has just happened. Well, there was fierce criticism of the Prime Minister earlier. The words disgraceful and incapable were used to describe him by an MP who was Conservative but has now defected to the Labour Party. Christian Wakeford, the MP for Bury South, made his switch official just moments before the Prime Minister fought for his political life at PMQs. This morning, around a dozen MPs submitted letters of no confidence in him as Boris Johnson's premiership hangs in the balance. Well, that was just ahead of midday, and Christian Wakeford being welcomed into the Commons and onto the Labour benches with applause from his new Labour colleagues as he took his seat on the opposition benches just behind the party leader. In a departing letter to the Prime Minister, he said, "I have wrestled with my conscience for many months, and you will know that I have made my policy misgivings clear on many occasions in private and sometimes in public. I can no longer support a government that has shown itself consistently out of touch with the hard-working people of Bury South and the country as a whole." He then goes on, continuing, "My decision is about much more than your leadership and the disgraceful way you have conducted yourself in recent weeks. However, I don't believe all politicians are the same, and I do believe in the power of politics to be a force for good." Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, used the beginning of PMQs to welcome his new recruit.
Can I start by warmly welcoming the honourable member for Bury South to his new place and to the Parliamentary Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, like so many people up and down the country, he has concluded that the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves.
Well, in a series of fierce exchanges in the Commons, Boris Johnson attempted to brush off criticism from the Labour Party over his comments to our political editor, Beth Rigby, that nobody told him that the Downing Street Party in May 2020 was a rule-breaking event.
First, he said there were no parties. Then the video landed, blowing that defence out the water. Next, he said he was sicker than furious when he found out about the parties, until it turned out that he himself was at the Downing Street garden party. Then last week he said he didn't realise he was at a party, and surprise, surprise, no one believed him. So this week, he's got a new defence. Nobody warned me that it was against the rules. That's it. Nobody told him. Since the Prime Minister wrote the rules, why on earth does he think that his new defence is going to work for him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we'd listened to the right honourable gentleman about COVID restrictions, which is the substance of his question, then, Mr. Speaker, we would still be, we would have been in lockdown after July. If this is the truth, if we listened to the Labour front bench in the run-up to Christmas and New Year, Mr. Speaker, we would have stayed in restrictions with huge damage to the economy. And it's because of the judgments that I've taken and that we have taken in Downing Street that we now have the fastest growing economy in the G7 and GDP, Mr. Speaker, now back up above pre-pandemic levels.
Well, the former Conservative Minister David Davis said that he has spent weeks defending the Prime Minister, but now it's time for him to go.
Like many on these benches, I've spent weeks and months defending the Prime Minister against often angry constituents. I've reminded them of his success in delivering Brexit and on the vaccine and many other things. But I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Well, let's bring in our political editor, Beth Rigby, who is here. So David Davis there really putting the boot in at the end of Prime Minister's questions. And when we saw that earlier defection, of course, a relatively new Conservative MP, his sentiment showed that this is not just the new Red Wall MPs that the sentiment is restricted to.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary Prime Minister's questions. Look, millions of people tuned in last week across various news channels to watch the Prime Minister give an explanation of that party at number 10 on May the 20th. And today, people no doubt watching to see how he would perform as these rumours now build that there could be an imminent confidence vote against him. And I should stress that no one really knows even when that threshold of 54 letters to trigger a ballot will come. But that is the context in which he has to perform. And I have to say, he came into that Prime Minister's questions today. It began with a defection from a Conservative MP, and Christian Wakeford is now being, no doubt, criticised heavily by colleagues who will be shocked and incensed by this defection. But he has been a Tory councillor since 2013 and became being an MP in 2019. He crossed the floor to the Labour benches. That is extremely difficult for any Prime Minister. The Labour Party sources are telling me that this is Operation Domino, implying that there's more to come now. That might not be true, that might just be spin, but let's see. The whips can't be sure. And then it ended with David Davis, a former cabinet minister, one of the biggest figures on the benches of the party, a former leadership contender, saying to the Prime Minister to his face, it's time for you to go. The first person to do that to his face. And the fact it was David Davis, well, that is just extremely, extremely damaging for the Prime Minister. And I think both of those events in PMQs, despite the Prime Minister's pretty strong performance, actually, getting some of his mojo back, coming out fighting, that really speaks to the precariousness of the position he now finds himself.
Because his demeanour was very different to the interview that you carried out with him yesterday, where, you know, his expression was very hangdog and he appeared very contrite and embarrassed almost. In the Commons today, he sort of had some of that bravado back, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think, look, yesterday it was the first time he had spoken in nearly a week. The revelations about what happened around Prince Philip's funeral had come out, and he hadn't spoken publicly about that. He was clearly distraught, actually, about those parties in Number 10 the night before the Queen laid to rest Prince Philip. Extremely difficult for him, for obvious reasons. And he hadn't spoken about these Dominic Cummings allegations that he knew about this event on May the 20th, this thing that he thought was a work event but quite evidently looked like a social gathering with booze and food and you know, dozens of people there. So they were difficult questions for him to answer, but you're right, he was very downbeat, downcast, apologetic, humble, and he looked a bit beaten yesterday. Now, that didn't go down well with the party either. If you're already wondering whether he's the guy that can lead you into the next election and he goes out to face the country completely defeated, you are going to... that's only going to exacerbate your concerns. And so it was interesting today. Everyone was waiting. How will he perform at Prime Minister's questions? He definitely came back in the kind of form that we're more used to him being in. The question is, Jane, whether the view has coalesced in the party that really he is done, and whether he's done in the next week, 2 weeks, few months, whether he can survive in the immediate term. Can he ever recover? And you saw two verdicts there, one from a very senior Conservative that has been in the party for many, many years, and one from one of the new 2019 intake, which will really cause worry in Number 10, I'm sure.
Well, what will this afternoon bring? We shall see. Beth, thank you very much. Well, let's just take a look at the details of how, if there was a leadership contest, it could be triggered. And this is all about letters. 54 out of 359 Conservative MPs, that's 15%, would have to write to the chair of the Backbench 1922 committee, that is Sir Graham Brady. Now, that would then trigger a vote of no confidence. If that happens, if just over 50%, or 180 MPs, vote against Boris Johnson, he'll be removed from office with immediate effect. Now, if the Prime Minister wins, with less than 50% voting against him, he stays in the job and he has the right to remain there unchallenged for a year. Well, this morning, Sky News understands that around 12 of 20 Tory MPs who were elected in 2019 and part of the so-called pork pie plot have already submitted their letters. And we know 6 other MPs have already publicly called for Boris Johnson to go, and 7 if you include David Davis just there. But it's thought that many more letters have officially gone in. And as you've been hearing, one MP known to have sent the letter, Christian Wakeford, has now defected to the Labour Party. Well, let's go live to the lobby and our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. And Sam, we knew about Christian Wakeford just before Prime Minister's questions. I don't imagine anybody knew what David Davis was going to do, necessarily. What has been the reaction as MPs come out of that chamber?
Well, Jane, welcome back to Central Lobby, 1 week on after yet another difficult Prime Minister's questions for Boris Johnson, yet another set of reactions from Tory MPs. The difference between this week and last week is that this week there is something more of an operation to shore up Boris Johnson after the double blow of Prime Minister's questions. First, as you say, Christian Wakeford, Bury South MP, he's defected to Labour, and then the thing that nobody saw coming, which was David Davis calling on the Prime Minister, for the love of God, to go. David Davis, as Nadine Dorris once wrote on Twitter, ex-SAS, is good at taking people out. Now those two figures are on different sides of the debate. But there is an attempt right now by Downing Street to get Tory MPs out, particularly on the airwaves, to start defending the Prime Minister, perhaps in a way that didn't happen terribly quickly last week. Now, one of those MPs is a 2019er, Stuart Anderson. He's Wolverhampton South West, and he joins me now. Stuart, Tory MPs look like they're voting with their feet. Christian Wakeford, now a Tory, now a Labour MP, and you had those comments from David Davis, himself a former leadership contender. What do you make of it all?
I don't think Christian's thought this through. He's 29 intake, same as me, a friend of mine. But people voted in Bury South. They voted for a Conservative MP under a Boris Johnson government to get Brexit done, level up the country and keep investing in Bury South. I believe at the next election it will be back in the Conservative hands.
How did Christian Wakeford end up coming to this decision. Do you think he was ever truly an integrated part of the Conservative Party? Is he a one-off, or, as Conservatives as well as Labour sources have told me, there might be more?
Well, they've not told me that. I saw today in a PMQs, and I see in the tea rooms a united group of MPs. 2019, as we keep getting there, called the new intake. They're not all rebels. They're not all looking to do that. We have a united group of people that are behind the PM, and we're there to back him.
United up to a point, Lord Copper. I mean, we've got maybe a dozen putting in letters calling for votes of no confidence in Boris Johnson just today. You can't call them united with any fairness. Do you understand why your colleagues have been driven to such a degree of anger about the Prime Minister?
So I believe from the 2019 intake, there was only one colleague, which was Christian Wakefield, that had publicly declared he put a letter in. Now that's gone. Now I get that there's been a barrage of bad headlines, and it's not what anybody wants to do. Everybody's here to represent their constituents. They want to keep doing the best, as I do for Wolverhampton South West. We don't want to be in that scenario. We don't want to have people defecting. I don't know of any more. Hopefully there isn't any more, but we need to call unity, get behind the PM, and just move forward on delivering for this country, as we have done so far.
Quite a lot of your colleagues are very critical of Christian Wakeford, suggest he was a bad fit for the party. He even apparently had a nickname of Christian Wakeford, according to one of your colleagues. Is it right to call him names after he's gone?
Well, I'm not going to call him names after he's gone. It's his decision.
Was it right that was that his nickname?
No, I never heard that. I didn't hear about that. His office was very close to mine, so I talked to him regularly. I'm aware he was not happy on things, but it's not right. I'm not calling him names. I'm not going to go and do that. I wish him all the best moving forward, but he's not going to be here long under a Keir Starmer leadership. People in Bury South voted for the Prime Minister.
A week ago, the Prime Minister, a lot of Tory MPs were saying, let's wait for the Sue Gray report. We seem to have moved on from that. Now we're getting the argument that the Prime Minister delivered Brexit, delivered a vaccine rollout. He should stay regardless of what the Sue Gray report says. Is that right? Do you think that nothing that the Sue Gray report could say might mean that the Prime Minister has to resign?
Well, I think that would be a very naive approach. You're aware of the ministerial code, as you've raised so many times, and the Prime Minister, same as every other MP, every other minister, is bound by that.
So if it turns out he lied at the dispatch box, the Prime Minister would have to go?
I'm not going to get into the hypotheticals. You're well aware of the ministerial code, and everybody should adhere to that. So let's see the outcome of the report, see what is said there, but at the moment we need to get behind the Prime Minister, we need to move forward, and I support the Prime Minister.
When you watch Boris Johnson at the dispatch box, refusing to answer the question when he first found out about the party, alleged party that he attended back in May 2020, he just refused to say when he was first told about it, and refused to say that he didn't like the dispatch box. Did you feel at all uncomfortable? Did you flinch at those replies? He could have very easily answered those questions.
So what we don't want to do is prejudice any inquiry, and he's been very clear about that. We need to see that result, and we need to move forward. But at the moment, we need unity, we need calm, and we need level heads to move forward. Bickering or fighting or falling out amongst ourselves will not be the right way forward.
What about figures in your party who are holding meetings about ousting the Prime Minister? What's your message to them today?
Well, as I said yesterday, I went out and basically said we need to come together. Let's get a level head and let's move forward united. If we're divided as a party, it will not be good for us. The outcome is not good.
Do you think Boris Johnson always tells the truth?
I think that the PM has been straight and honest with us in the chamber. He's been there and he's delivered and said what he means. We need to now see that inquiry. We need to move forward, and MPs are behind him. You've said there's been a small group that have been holding meetings. I don't know the details of that, but I know that the bulk of the tea room and in the chamber were right behind the Prime Minister.
You can answer with a straight yes. Do you think Boris Johnson always tells the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much indeed. So there we have it. Tory MPs now having to go to the barricades to defend Boris Johnson at this very tricky time. Those that choose Team Boris are going to have to continue to defend him for quite some time to come, because you've got the Sue Gray report, you've got the possibility that there might be other revelations after that, and who knows what's going to come down the tracks in the next few weeks and months with local elections in May, and then we go on as we come out of the pandemic and face a cost of living crisis. It's a very tricky time for the Conservative Party.
Certainly is, Sam. Sam Coates, thanks very much. Well, of course, just after Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson outlined changes to England's COVID restrictions. Let's hear what he had to say about that.
This morning, the Cabinet concluded that because of the extraordinary booster campaign, together with the way the public have responded to the Plan B measures, we can return to Plan A in England and allow Plan B regulations to expire. As a result, from the start of Thursday next week, mandatory certification will end. Organisations can, of course, choose to use the NHS COVID pass voluntarily, but we will end the compulsory use of COVID status certification in England. From now on, the government is no longer asking people to work from home. And people should now speak to their employers about arrangements for returning to the office. And having looked at the data carefully, the Cabinet concluded that once regulations lapse, the government will no longer mandate the wearing of face masks anywhere. From tomorrow, we will no longer require face masks in classrooms, and the Department for Education will shortly remove national guidance on their use in communal areas.
So, as you just heard, the wearing of masks will no longer be mandatory in shops and on public transport, with the public urged to make their own judgment. Guidance to working from home is being removed, allowing people to go back to offices. And the requirement of showing NHS COVID passes, a negative test or a proof of full vaccination, will stop in all settings. Anyone who tests positive will still have to self-isolate until March the 24th, though the Prime Minister has confirmed that the experts are not going to renew current regulations if the data allows. Let's talk to our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. Not sure that entirely made sense there, Thomas. So this is the third time restrictions have been relaxed. What is the science that the Prime Minister is basing this on?
Well, he's taken heart from the latest data from the Office for National Statistics, which does show that there's been a 20% drop in infections last week compared to the week before. Now, we've seen that on the daily dashboard for some time. There have been doubts over whether that was a real thing, whether the changes to the PCR testing rules might be a factor there. But this confirms it. And I think that has given him the confidence that he can remove Plan B without leading to a big rise in infections. Scientists aren't so sure, though. We had warnings from the SAGE group, who advised the government last week, in which they said that there could be a rebound in cases if the peak hasn't passed in all regions. Now, in the Midlands, hospital admissions have plateaued. They're not falling as they are elsewhere. So there's some element of doubt there about whether what the impact this will have. And there's also been warnings from the University of Warwick. They looked at the impact of removing Plan B. And if people went back to their normal behaviour over the following 4 weeks, they believe that there could be a rise in hospital admissions between 1,000 and 2,000 a day in a second wave in the spring. So we're not out of the woods yet. Infections are still really high. You know, it's about 100,000 cases a day, the 7-day average. And that is much higher than January last year. If you think back to the peak of last year, when they were about 61,000 a day. And we thought that was bad. So we're not out of the woods. This is a gamble from the government. They believe they can do it. And they've been proved right before Christmas. They didn't go as far